The Dallas Cowboys have looked pretty dominant this season with blowout wins against the Giants, the Jets, and the Patriots. But it wasn't the offense that scored points in those games. In fact, the offense has looked pretty anemic this year. The defense scored 14 points against the Patriots. They scored 14 points against the Giants, and they had a slew of turnovers in all those games, which led to easy points for the offense. In the games that the Dallas Cowboys lost, they lost to the Cardinals 28-16. They had no turnovers in that game, and they lost to the 49ers 42-10. And there was actually 4 turnovers by the offense that led to that loss. So the offense has been pretty sluggish ever since Mike McCarthy made the call to get rid of Kellen Moore, the offensive coordinator, who is now with the Los Angeles Chargers. The decision was made for Mike McCarthy to take over play calling for the Dallas Cowboys. And let's see how that has worked out for the Cowboys so far. Twitter user Arjun Menon posted the tendencies of all 32 teams to start every series of downs with a run-pass cadence. And he found that the Cowboys were one of the biggest offenders at a 10% of the time, which ranks 7th highest in the league. The Cowboys are averaging 21.2 offensive points per game, down 5.2 points per game from last season. Meanwhile, the Chargers have been averaging 5 more points per game with Kellen Moore as the offensive coordinator. Dallas is tied for 5th most third downs faced per game. Opposing defenses have recognized the patterns in the play calling of Mike McCarthy, with even Fred Warner making fun of the play calling and saying how easy it was to predict how they were going to run their routes and how to sack Dak Prescott last week. In addition, they're 28th in red zone touchdown percentage, and Dak has already thrown 5 picks this year. Justin Herbert, meanwhile, has increased his average pass length to 8.8 in 2003 after averaging 6.4 last season. So Herbert has vastly improved while Dak Prescott has taken a nosedive under Mike McCarthy's play calling and running of the offense. So the Chargers' 2 losses have come in close games versus better coaches in the Titans and the Dolphins. So Brandon Staley is a defensive-minded head coach that has one of the worst defenses in the league. They are also giving up 1.8 passing touchdowns per game and 1.4 rushing touchdowns, in addition to giving up the most passing yards per game this season. So we have a offensive-minded head coach who can't field an offense versus a defensive-minded head coach who can't field a defense. And the coordinators of those teams are the ones that are the stars. Kellen Moore, the lead of the OC of the Los Angeles Chargers, versus Dan Quinn, the DC of Dallas Cowboys. So the $1 million question is, in this matchup tonight against the Dallas Cowboys and the Los Angeles Chargers, which team is going to overcome the incompetencies of their head coach? Hey, what's up, guys? I'm Simon Edwards at Pumacom with Heat Seeker Sports, and you're watching Gamescript. And this is a show where we're going to try to build some showdown lineups for DraftKings, and we're going to try to figure out a path where we can predict the game script in this Dallas Cowboys versus Los Angeles Chargers game. We're looking at a total of 50.5 with the Dallas Cowboys at 1.5 point favorites. So the question that I want to ask is, how are the Dallas Cowboys favorites given the struggles that their offense has been having and the, just general exploitability of the defense right now, that they have several major injuries to the defense, which has happened recently. And we'll go over that when we're looking at these player pools and building these lineups. But before I dig in, please give a like to this video. I'm looking for 15 likes so I can put out a shorter video with my favorite plays after doing a little bit more research before the game starts. I'll be putting that out tonight after I get 15 likes on this video. And make sure you're hitting subscribe on the YouTube channel, because I do these breakdowns for every island game. Every island game I do a game script for. So we are crushing on those. Had a couple hits in the past week recently. Missed out on the Sunday night game. I didn't quite get that one right. I had James Cook in the captain, and the Bills, once again, they took a more pass-heavy approach, but they also did not get the blowout that I was anticipating against the Giants. So it seemed that Tyrod Taylor was an upgrade over Daniel Jones. And the Giants defense, they played well. The Giants defense has actually been pretty decent. I talked about that yesterday, but I still was expecting a blowout by the Bills over the Giants, which did not happen. So we'll move on to this game script. The game that I'm looking at tonight should be a pretty entertaining one on paper, but there's been a lot of issues with each of these teams, which makes me question the total on it. Honestly, I just think that the way that the defense on Dallas's side has been playing, they've been playing pretty lights out for the most part. When they're on, they're on. As I mentioned in those scores at the top, they've been able to hold the Giants to 0 points. They held the Jets to 10 points. They held the Cardinals. Well, the Cardinals beat them. They scored 28 points against the Cowboys, but they held the Patriots to 3 points. And then they got blown out again by the 49ers. And just a note on the 49ers, this season so far, coming off a week after the 49ers opponents are 1-3. And last season they were 0-15. So coming off a game versus the 49ers, who are a very physical team, tends to lead to a loss the following week. And Dallas does not seem like the type of team that could recover from that, and be the exception to the rule on being able to recover from like a physical matchup like that, just based on, the coach's inability to prepare. The coach generally, does not seem to care. Like the coach generally does not seem to care. He admits to lying about getting the job. He said some pretty dumb stuff in press conferences, and he just seems like he's not the sharpest tool in the shed. And I think that's where Los Angeles has a little bit of an edge, because Brandon Staley makes a lot of like dumb mistakes, but Brandon Staley seems like he's a little bit sharper than McCarthy. But from the standpoint of the offensive coordinator, Kellen Moore going up against Dan Quinn, the defensive coordinator of the Cowboys, those are where we want to look for coaching tendencies, because those are the guys that are really making the impact on their team's win and loss records. So we'll dig in here a little bit. Austin Eckler is returning this week from an injury. He's been out for a few weeks. Last game he played was week 1, and he had 29.4 fantasy points. He had 16 attempts, 5 targets, and, just was, his usual stud self. The thing with Austin Eckler, he's coming off of a high ankle sprain, so we don't know how much use he's going to get. So we want to keep an eye on the injury report tonight. They're coming off of a bye. So the Chargers, he had an extra week of rest. So there's a good chance that he's coming in, at least like 80% or, like close to 100%. So there's a good chance that he won't have any limitations, but you want to keep an eye on the news, because any hint that he's going to be limited, might affect whether or not we want to start him in the captain. Justin Herbert, he is having a monster year. Looks like he's having one of his best years under Kellen Moore. We're looking at 24 fantasy points last week, 32 the week before, 25 the week before, and 21 in week 1. Now, that 21 in week 1 with Eckler in the game is important, because these 3 monster weeks have come with Eckler out. And, Eckler makes a big impact on the game. and Eckler's presence, like enables Herbert to throw less. We're looking at 228 yards in week 1 versus Miami, 305 versus Tennessee with Eckler out, 405 with Eckler out, and then 167 last week. I don't know what happened there against Vegas, but they won by a touchdown. He had 24 attempts last week, which was his lowest of the season. You know what? I think he broke his thumb on his non-throwing hand, or he broke his middle finger on his non-throwing hand. So maybe that had to do with it. He is not on the injury report today, though. At least he's not questionable for today. So, we'll see how that affects his throwing today. But yeah, his last game, he fractured that middle finger on his non-throwing hand. So that could be interesting with having to grip the ball with two hands and having that defense running at him with Micah Parsons doing that pass rush. So that'll be interesting. Keenan Allen is always interesting. He's been a monster this year too. Mike Williams went down in the last game. So Mike Williams is lost for the season with an ACL. That's going to mean more targets for Keenan Allen. Keenan Allen had 5 targets in his last game. He had 20 targets against Minnesota. He had 10 targets versus Tennessee and 9 targets versus Miami. He hasn't had he had that monster 48-point game and a monster 34-point game, but last week he only scored 12 fantasy points. I would look for him to probably have a bigger game against Dallas tonight, but Dallas does have a good pass rush. So we're going to have to kind of get creative with how we work Keenan Allen into a good game. We got Dak Prescott, who's having just an abysmal season. A lot of it has to do with the offense just has not gotten the opportunities to throw the ball this season. But in the games where they, were in it, trying to win throughout the entire game, as opposed to coasting with a huge lead that the defense provided. In the loss to Arizona, when Dak had to throw 40 attempts, he only threw 249 yards and 1 touchdown and 1 interception. Fantasy output of 15 points. That's against Arizona's defense when he's trying to come from behind to beat that team. Keep in mind, Arizona's head coach is Jonathan Gannon, the former defensive coordinator of the Philadelphia Eagles, who's very familiar with Dak Prescott. We had the San Francisco game last week. He only had 24 attempts in that game, but his completion percentage was 58%, only 153 yards, and 7 points of fantasy output. So Dak Prescott, when they needed him, he has been MIA. And I think a lot of that has to do with Mike McCarthy's predictable play calling, just setting him up to get eaten alive by that San Francisco defense. So Dak Prescott is going to be like a decision point tonight on whether we think that he can have a bounce back week against these Chargers. And I would tend to lean more on the Kellen Moore advantage in that matchup, being able to alert the defense of the Chargers about the tendencies of Dak Prescott, as opposed to Dan Quinn being able to be more familiar with what the tendencies are for Kellen Moore, who's working with a completely different team. So it should be an interesting matchup between those coordinators tonight. Tony Pollard has had a pretty sluggish season too. He had 9.4 points against San Francisco, 9 points against New England. He had a couple, he started out of the gates pretty strong with 22 points, 20 points, and 18 points, with those big leads, running out those big leads with the Giants and the Jets, but then also in catch-up mode from the Cardinals. Against the Cardinals, he had only 3 targets versus the Cardinals. He had 8 targets against the Jets, and he had 3 targets versus the Giants. And then last week in comeback mode, he had 5 targets versus the 49ers. So something to keep in mind with Tony Pollard, if you got him in a losing game script, he's still, going to be fantasy relevant with all that passing work he seems to be getting. CeeDee Lamb, CeeDee Lamb is, he's been disgruntled these last few weeks, and he's had good reason because they haven't been using him very well. He had 5 targets last week, 6 targets the week before, 7 targets the week before that. Look at that, 7 targets while in losing to Arizona and 5 targets while losing to San Francisco. I mean, that's just inexcusable, for the talent of this guy, and once again points to the bad play calling that the Cowboys have had this season on the offense. But CeeDee Lamb, he's always going to be a guy that I'm interested in, and like the Chargers are giving up points. They're giving up points to slot receiver. They're giving up 27 points, DraftKings points a game to slot. They're giving up 23.7 DraftKings points a game to wideouts. Like as far as Tony Pollard's concerned, the Chargers are giving up 27.5 points a game to running back, and with Dak, Chargers are giving up 23.2 points a game to quarterback. So this is about as good a get right spot as you can get for the Cowboys offense. But it's just going to be a matter, again, like if Fred Warner is calling out how predictable the play calling is, this is a week ago that they played. So how is Dallas under Mike McCarthy going to adjust in 7 days to completely change their offense to become less predictable? I don't think that he can do it. And I think he's lazy. I think he's too lazy to do it. And we're going to find that out tonight because we've seen with Brandon Staley, as bad as his defenses have been, he is the guy that, after the San Francisco 49ers faced the Miami Dolphins last year, Brandon Staley's the one who kind of took that game plan, that defensive game plan that the 49ers used against Miami, and was able to expose Tua in that matchup. And he was the first one to really shut down the Dolphins. And the Dolphins were not the same offense after that, and they obviously with Tua's concussion issues playing a major factor too. But like the offense itself was exposed at that point. It was much more difficult for them to get back on track. So Staley has pulled it out in the past when he recognizes that an offense can be predictable. So we'll see if he's able to do that tonight. This is where I give the Chargers the edge, because I think Staley has the ability to adjust and adjust the defense towards the offensive opponent, whereas I don't think that McCarthy has that ability. I think McCarthy just wants to do what he wants to do. And in the case of Mike McCarthy, that is run the ball. And, just another weird stat while I'm on this rant against McCarthy. The Dallas Cowboys have scored 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. They've scored 9 total touchdowns on offense. And listen to these guys who've scored these touchdowns. Tony Pollard has scored 2. Hunter Lipke has scored 1. Kevontae Turpin has scored 2. CeeDee Lamb has scored 1. Ferguson, the tight end, has scored 1. Dowdle has scored 1. Shoemaker has scored 1. So it's been basically the touchdowns are going to all their scrubs for the most part. We got CeeDee Lamb only has 1. We got Pollard only has 2. And Ferguson, like another one of their main weapons, only has 1. So the rest of these touchdowns are just going to these no names. So it's a very interesting situation with the Dallas offense, and that's not very promising for these high priced weapons like CeeDee Lamb. But like in a situation like this, we have to choose which Dallas weapons that we think are going to be the best ones to plug in our lineup. So we'll take that into consideration with CeeDee Lamb's good matchup here against the Chargers. We also got Josh Palmer. Josh Palmer is basically taking over as the wide receiver 2 now that Mike Williams is out. Palmer had 11 points last week. He had 15.5 the week before that. And, like in the first couple weeks where he was less of a part of the offense, he had 4 points and 1 point. but the last 2 weeks, 8 targets and 7 targets. So Josh Palmer has become a big part of this offense, and that is something to keep in mind when they're facing off against the Cowboys tonight. One thing that I will say too about Eckler that I forgot to mention is, like the injuries for the Cowboys defense right now, they are really banged up at the linebacker core, and they lost Leighton Vander Esch last week to a neck injury. It looks like he's going to be, potentially gone for the season, but that linebacker core was already like struggling with their depth, like even before that, and now they lost their best linebacker, and they're going to be in trouble, against these guys like Austin Eckler and like the tight ends that they face, because they're just so banged up, and they got very little depth at that linebacker position that's going to make them vulnerable. There was talk on the local radio about putting Micah Parsons, giving him some reps at linebacker. So that's how bad the linebacker situation is right now for the Cowboys. So keep that in mind when you're building your lineups and thinking of guys to plug in. So who else do we have? We got Josh Kelly, not interested there now that Eckler's back. We got Brandon Cooks, who has really done nothing since joining the Cowboys. He's had 2.3 points, 6.7 points. His highest targets were in week 2 versus Arizona when they were playing from behind. He had 7 targets that week, but he only caught 2 of them, and he only put up 17 yards. So less than 4 fantasy points there. Call it what you will, maybe he's dusty, or maybe he's just in dusty Mike McCarthy's offense. I don't know, but Brandon Cooks has not done anything this year. Ferguson is someone I'm interested in. I believe he's got one of the top target shares of any tight ends, and Hendershot is out this week, I believe. So Hendershot, was a guy that was taking some of those targets away from Ferguson, but he's out, I believe. And that look at the targets that Ferguson had. He had 7 targets, three out of 5 weeks. He's had 7 targets, and he's had fantasy outputs of 10.1 points, just about 10 points against Arizona, and then 14.7 points. And he's at 5,200, so that salary range and those point totals, put him in the interest level for this game tonight. I think that, the one negative for him is that the Chargers are only middling against tight ends, so it's not like a huge advantageous matchup like we see with CeeDee Lamb has and Tony Pollard has. So just keep that in mind with Ferguson. He's interesting, but like those other guys are a lot more interesting. Aubrey, the kicker on Dallas, he's done pretty good this season. He's had a lot of opportunities every week except for the week against San Francisco. He scored over 10 fantasy points. So here's the thing with McCarthy, getting in the red zone and having, like one of the worst, like red zone, if not the worst red zone touchdown conversion percentage in the league. They're going to be kicking a lot of field goals. They're going to be making a lot of field goal attempts. And you can see that in his fantasy points, 12, 11, 18, and 10. So keep that in mind with Aubrey. Aubrey is, at 5,000. He's almost too cheap at that price, given the, the Cowboys should be able to get to the red zone against the Chargers. And if they get to the red zone and continue their tendencies to struggle in the red zone because of bad play calling, then look for a lot of field goals by this Aubrey guy. Gerald Everett, I'm interested in just based on what I was talking about. He has not done anything this year. His highest targets is 6, but against that linebacker crew that Dallas has right now, all banged up, that makes Gerald Everett interesting. He is expensive, though, at 4,600. So I don't know if a lot of people are going to start him. But another interesting note is Donald Parham popped up on the injury report. I think it was a wrist. He's got a wrist issue. It looks like Parham's going to play, but he's going to be playing with a brace on his hand. So, Parham is going to be banged up, which makes Everett interesting in this matchup against the linebackers. And, they're probably going to have to, in order to play against Micah Parsons, they might play with heavier, tight end formations in this matchup, which will put, Everett and, probably Parham on the field at the same time. But Everett, being, more of a pass catching tight end and not having a brace on his arm, he could benefit in this matchup tonight. Dicker, the kicker, is, he hasn't really done too much. The first couple weeks he had, pretty big games. But I do like Dicker in this matchup just because the Chargers are in the same situation. They should be able to move the ball. But the Dallas defense being as good as it is, they might struggle to convert into touchdowns, which makes Dicker interesting in this matchup. Quentin Johnson is a guy whose routes run, jumped up to something like 70% when Mike Williams went out. So Quentin Johnson, they're coming off a bye too, so they've had time to try to get him and Herbert on the same page. Quentin Johnson will be interesting tonight for sure, and he's only 4,200. So this is a highly touted rookie. I think he was the first round pick of the Chargers. This past draft. Let me double check that. Yeah, because Quentin Johnson is, he was a guy that was getting a lot of buzz in the draft, but in best ball we weren't drafting him because it seemed like his buzz was getting overdone. But he is in a situation right now. Yeah, he was a first round pick, so he's in a situation right now where he has to get integrated into this offense. So, even if he had, some knocks against him, like in the preseason or whatever, like Quentin Johnson is a name that you're going to want to keep in mind in a matchup like this. The Cowboys defense is really cheap this week. They're only 3,800, and they've been putting up some monster scores. 27 points against New England, 15 points against the Jets, and 37 points against the Giants. But they've also had two anemic outputs, with 1 point against Arizona and negative 1 point against San Francisco. For 3,800, that's a cheap price for this Dallas Cowboys defense with their upside. So I'm going to be interested in the Dallas Cowboys at this price, even if I think that the Chargers are going to have no problems. I don't think they're going to have no problems, but I think the Chargers should be able to put up points tonight. Let's go back to Herbert here. Herbert only has one interception on the year. One of the big knocks on Kellen Moore was that Dak was throwing so many interceptions that they thought that Kellen Moore was kind of setting him up, like in, with his play calling to throw interceptions. Herbert only has one interception this year. He's got one interception. He's got one fumble. So he's caused two turnovers versus Dak, who has, without Kellen Moore, he's got 4 interceptions already this season. So that's another thing to kind of keep in mind there when you're looking at these defenses, because right underneath the Cowboys defense, we got the Chargers defense at 3,200, and the Chargers defense, they put up 14 points last week, but if the Cowboys are going to be predictable on their offense, and Brandon Staley is supposed to be, like a defensive-minded coach, he makes very questionable decisions with, like the actual game management. But he was a highly touted defensive coordinator that came over to be the head coach of the Chargers. We have not seen him like pull out like that greatness in his defenses, but the defensive also have been pretty banged up. This week he gets back tentatively. Joey Bosa looks like he's coming back, and Derwin James should be in tonight too. Keep an eye on those injury reports, but those guys are going to be important for this game too. Just especially if you are interested in the Chargers defense. So keep an eye on that, because the Chargers defense is not someone I'd take out of the player pool the way that the Cowboys offense has been performing. And if the Cowboys are playing from behind tonight, look for them to make lots of mistakes, because I mean, if the defense of the Chargers comes up with a game plan for the Cowboys after the Cowboys got exposed by the 49ers last week, then they can do it what they did with the Dolphins last year and come up with a good game plan to to stop that Cowboys offense. So just keep that in mind. The Dallas Michael Gallup is interesting. He's only 2,800. He's also got like that great matchup against this defense. And if we're expecting I don't know if Dak's going to have enough time to throw the ball. I mean, they got a healthy offensive line, and they got one of the the best offensive lines. But if we got Bosa and Khalil Mack, pass rushing, and they have success pass, like I don't know how much time Dak will have to throw. I mean, he'll probably be fine, but keep Gallup in mind, because Gallup has been getting targets again. Like he was slow last year coming off that ACL injury, and he's been kind of slow this year, but like he's looked pretty good in the games that I've seen him play. Apparently he's not, he just might not be getting open, or he might not, there's something preventing him from having his breakout game so far, but he's gotten 5 targets, 6 targets, 7 targets, 2 targets, 2 targets. So the last 3 weeks, he's been getting targeted, and this is the type of matchup to have as get right game for Michael Gallup. So keep Michael Gallup in mind, and he's only 2,800. Like I don't know, like he might be one of the higher owned guys on the slate tonight at that price tag, but I still like Michael Gallup, and he's going to be some great salary relief tonight. It's probably a trap, like with that low price. But he's still like someone I wouldn't shy away from, just because Michael Gallup, we've seen his upside in the past. Isaiah Spiller, not interested there. Parham is a guy that I'm interested in, just based on his red zone targets. I think he's one of the most targeted guys in the red zone in the league. He had 11 points in week 1. He had 14 points in week 3. So he's a guy that you can get at 2,200 that has that double-digit upside for points. So, keep him in mind for tonight, especially with what I mentioned about the linebacker crew on Dallas's side, being banged up. That's going to benefit the tight ends. It's going to benefit Eckler tonight. Rico Dowdle, like in that list of scrubs that I named, he's one of the guys that have actually scored a touchdown. So that makes him interesting, but his highest output is 13.6. Other than that, he hasn't been getting a lot of work, and I don't think this is a game where, like Dallas is going to be, milking the clock. So, or at least milking the clock while they're in the lead. They're going to be, if anything, probably playing from behind tonight. So, not really interested in Rico Dowdle. Turpin. Turpin's pretty interesting. He's got 2 touchdowns so far. So he's one of the few receivers that's actually had an output this season, but he hasn't done anything. Like apart from those touchdowns, he's getting 1 target, 1 target, 1 target, and 3 targets, and then 0 targets against Arizona. The Arizona game is probably more indicative. I don't know if he was out that week or what his deal was, but let's see if I can see anything on there. He might have been a healthy scratch that week or something, but I mean, it seems weird that like he had targets every week except for the one against Arizona. So it could have been a thing where since they were playing from behind, they didn't want to use him. They didn't need to use him. Maybe he was just getting this early work because they were playing with those massive leads and they needed to put in the backup crew. But Turpin he's interesting. He scored that touchdown last week against the 49ers. So, but his price has gone way up. He's 1,600 now. So, just keep that in mind. Darius Davis. This is a guy that I'm kind of interested in because the situation with Quentin Johnson, if Quentin Johnson is not syncing up with Justin Herbert, one of these young guys is going to need to step up, like to take that wide receiver 3 role now that Joshua Palmer is a wide receiver 2. And Darius Davis, he's a rookie just like Quentin Johnson. He's had 2 targets, 1 target, 0 targets, 1 target. But he's a fast guy, and he scored 8.7 points last week. He's a really fast guy. Like, don't be surprised if they start integrating him into the offense more. Like maybe him and Quentin Johnson get on a timeshare, and then Darius Davis is the cheap guy with the no name value in that pairing. So like he's a guy that Davis didn't see a significant snaps bump when Mike Williams out, as he played just 16 snaps compared to Quentin Johnson's 33. The speedy rookie will have situational role as a field stretcher moving forward, but it's hard to imagine Davis operating as anything more unless another injury occurs on the depth chart. I don't really buy that. I think like with a week off, they might try to figure out a way to incorporate this Darius Davis guy more into the offense. So keep him on your list as a cheap guy. Deuce Vaughn, not someone I'm very interested in this game. He's been getting the attempts, but he hasn't been showing the output. So I'm not interested in Deuce Vaughn. Lipke is the other dude that got a touchdown in the scrub list. So Hendershot is on IR, so that's good for Ferguson. Not seeing anyone else I'm really interested in this list. So let's build the first lineup here. We'll build a chalky one first. I think given the price points, I would guess that Pollard is going to be a popular captain, so let's use him and build a game script around him. I think if we have Pollard, we want to have a guy. Let's get our Chargers in first. I want to have Eckler in there. I want to have Herbert in there. I wonder if I can get Keenan Allen in here too without. All right, that leaves us with 1,500. So, I'd probably have to get rid of one of these. Let's say that like Eckler. I like Eckler kind of better than Keenan Allen. Let's see something real quick. What is Keenan Allen running in the slot this season? He's 67% in the slot. That's where they have their best matchup, and they got the linebacker stuff going on. Let's go with let's stick with Keenan Allen. Let's get rid of Eckler. Let's see. If I'm putting these guys in there, then I want a guy that's gonna help Pollard, put Pollard into a scoring position. So I need a field stretcher. So let's look at let's say that they've decided to focus on taking Lamb out of the game tonight. Lamb's disgruntled though, so keep that in mind. He's got the squeaky wheel thing going on. But let's say Michael Gallup is the guy that catches 1 or 2 bombs tonight and puts Pollard in scoring position, and then Pollard's able to finally convert on some touchdowns. He's actually got 2 touchdowns on the year, which is the most for any of these Dallas guys. But let's say Pollard scores another 2 tonight. I Herbert is throwing mainly to Allen. Let's see. Who else would we want in this build? I would go with, maybe one of these kickers. Let's say the Aubrey. Let's put Aubrey in this build. That would help keep CeeDee Lamb maybe out of scoring a touchdown, which, we're going to need to have him not in this lineup at only 9K. So that leaves us with 6,400. 6,400. I might go with Ferguson. Let's say that the up the middle work is going to Ferguson instead of CeeDee Lamb, but Ferguson is like he's not able to he's putting up like the PPR, but not getting like a ton of yards, and maybe he gets a touchdown that'll keep him away from that captain spot. So if we put him in there, that gives us like 1,200 left over. You can go different directions with this too. Like if we decided to, like, what if we took out Aubrey and we put in Dicker? That would leave us with 7K. I mean, that you can get Josh Palmer in there. Like that's a good way to go too. I tend to like Aubrey better than Dicker tonight though, because I think that I just think that the tendencies of the coaches, I think Staley would, team would be more likely to go for, like riskier, like 2-point conversions or like going for it on fourth and stuff versus Mike McCarthy, who's going to be predictable and, kicking field goals any opportunity he has to put up points. So just keep that in mind. Like there's a few different ways that you can go here with building your lineups. Another interesting one would be, let's say that we want to put in Eckler instead of Allen. That would leave us with, let's put in Aubrey over Dicker. Let's see. That leaves us with 5,800, and that's situated. I mean, you still got options. If you wanted to put in Cooks, you could. I probably wouldn't put a second receiver, wide receiver in there, like if I don't have Dak in this lineup. So, I mean, keep that in mind if you want to swap out Herbert. Maybe Herbert's like, broken middle finger in his non-throwing hand is affecting his performance. But I like Ferguson better out of those two. And I also like Everett because Everett, I think, would get less ownership than Ferguson. Let me check and see if we can see what Everett's ownership is real quick here. We'll look at his total ownership. Everett, where are you? He's way down there. You got to scroll way down. He's like 16% owned total. So 16% owned for Everett. You got Parham dealing with that wrist injury, and you got the linebackers of Dallas all banged up. And don't be surprised if Everett scores a touchdown or he gets used more than he has been used so far this season. But we've seen it before with Kellen Moore, like using Dalton Schultz in the offense for the Cowboys and stuff like that. He really hasn't like integrated Everett too much into this offense yet. Let me look and see what the tight ends have been doing so far for the Chargers this year. Tight ends, week 1, tight ends had 6 targets. Parham and Everett each had 3. Tight ends, week 2 had 6 targets. Week 3, they had 8 targets. With Everett had 6 and Parham had 2. So they really used them, pretty heavily against Minnesota. And Parham ended up with 14 fantasy points and Everett ended up with 9 fantasy points that week. So that could have been like a game plan specific usage of those tight ends, maybe because he liked the matchup against the Vikings. So, that's interesting. Let's see what the Vikings are giving up for fantasy points a game. To tight end, they are giving up 12.8 fantasy points. So it wasn't like a matchup that jumped off the page from a fantasy perspective, but maybe there was something that they saw, Kellen Moore saw in that matchup that he liked, that led him to throw to the tight ends that week. And that's important, because if we know that he's going to adapt to the defensive, to the what do you call it, the defensive tendencies of the other team, then that would make it interesting with the linebackers being as banged up as they are. How much is Dallas giving up to tight end? Dallas is giving up. I mean, they're giving up 12.8 points a game to the tight end position. That's exactly the same amount as Minnesota's given up. So, and that, I believe that's before. Oh, that's George Kittle. George Kittle had that monster week last week against Dallas. So yeah, definitely keep Everett in mind, and maybe that bumps up his ownership a little bit, like just that recency bias. But I'm only seeing 16% overall. I'm not even talking about captain ownership. So that's interesting. And then the following week against the Raiders, they only had 2 targets to Everett, but it seems like, Justin Herbert threw the ball 24 times in week 4 versus running the ball 12 times. So that must have been after he hurt his middle finger, and he was banged up. So very interesting there with Everett, and the situation with Parham, playing with a brace and everything. Like if he's getting more of those targets, we could see 8 targets for Parham tonight. I mean for Everett tonight. So just keep that in mind with Everett. So let's clear this out. Let's do a build with, let's see. Let me try one with, I like Eckler a lot tonight, like just with that, linebacker situation. Again, and Herbert's going to be under pressure a lot with Micah Parsons. So, he's going to be having to, dump it off pretty quick. I believe that, Herbert's time to throw has improved so this year too. But let's put Eckler in there. Let's say with Eckler, I don't really want to put necessarily, let's put Herbert in there with him. Let's put Pollard. Let's go with Everett, just based on what I've been talking about. Let's see. That leaves us with 8,200. Let's put in Aubrey. Pollard and Aubrey are kind of poaching from each other, which is why Pollard's not in the captain in this, but maybe he has the highest output on the Dallas side. That leaves us with the Chargers, who, obviously correlates with Eckler. And, what I was talking about, like if Dak's having a meltdown, that would explain why CeeDee Lamb's not able to get in this lineup. You could go Michael Gallup, same reasoning that we had before. That would give you a 3-3 build if you like that. If you don't like that, you could swap out Aubrey with Dicker. That would also help to, maybe. No, I think I prefer Aubrey in that situation. But you do have options down here. Like if you wanted to start Eckler as a captain, I think Eckler is going to be pretty popular though. Let me see if I can find a captain that I like that is not going to be highly owned, because I think it's pretty spread out, like from the projections that I see of the ownership on these captains here. There's not a guy that's going to be like 20% owned like we've had for the last few slates. So let's look down here. Out of the big guys, looks like CeeDee Lamb, but he still has 10% ownership. All right. So if we want to get like a little bit weird, we could go with a Joshua Palmer or a, let's see, Quentin Johnson. I don't want to put Quentin Johnson in the captain. If we did put a cheap guy in the captain, let's put Everett in the captain. Let's say Everett gets a monster boost tonight. Scores Everett's in the captain. You want him to score 2 touchdowns because he's not going to be getting, that many PPR. Maybe he gets let's say he gets 7, 8 targets for 6 receptions, maybe 80 yards, and then 2 touchdowns. So that would give him 14 plus 12, like 20, 14 plus 12, 26 points. So that would be a big game for Everett. Herbert's thrown to Everett. Let's get Eckler in there too. And let's get Pollard in there, because I think those guys are going to be the ones that have the best matchups and everything. Let's put Aubrey in this one too. That leaves us with 6,500. We've been able to get an extra stud in there. It's going to have a little bit more balance to it. I don't know that I like going that Everett direction in the captain just yet. Let's see if we take Eckler out and we put in Keenan Allen. That leaves us with ability to put in Josh Palmer. But I don't want to put Herbert with 3 receivers and not have him in the captain. If I could get to CeeDee Lamb though, because if you're going to put a cheap guy, you want to get as many studs in as you can. I mean, you do that and you can get Michael Gallup in there. That's interesting, but that will be duped massively. Because anyone putting Everett in that captain, they're going to be trying to put in as many studs as possible. Which makes going that other direction a little bit better with going with Eckler and Aubrey, and then just kind of having this middling range, because this type of build, I'm not expecting necessarily a blowout. I'm expecting more, or not, I shouldn't say blowout, but a high scoring game. I'm expecting more in a build like this for it to kind of be close, and not necessarily hitting that total, but maybe 42 points or something like that, where these guys are the PPR guys that are racking up points. Herbert's the better of the 2 quarterbacks. Everett's taking a couple touchdowns, but they're all getting enough work. Pollard on the other side, the game's close because we got Pollard still active in it. Maybe it's close because again, we got Cooks or Gallup that we could put in there. If we put in Gallup, maybe that other build makes a little bit more sense, but that's the direction that you can go. You can put in the Cowboys D in a build like this. I probably wouldn't do that. I'd be more likely to put the Chargers D in a build like this, because we got to have reasons why Keenan Allen isn't in this lineup, and maybe it's because the Chargers defense is giving them easy setups for touchdowns, and those touchdowns are being scored by Everett, and then they take enough of a lead that Eckler is the one who's who's milking out the clock, but then Pollard is still involved, because we saw how involved Pollard still is in the passing game. And instead of maybe these receivers on the Dallas side getting the work, it's Pollard, and then Aubrey is scoring field goals instead of these other instead of CeeDee Lamb scoring touchdowns or something like that. But that's a direction that you can play with. As far as cheap guys, what are the optimizers putting in the most for cheap guys here in the captain spot? Let me see if there's one that they're kind of focused on. Michael Gallup. Michael Gallup is the cheap guy that they like, the optimizers. So let me try and build a Michael Gallup one. Let's put in Michael Gallup into that captain role. Very cheap at only, let's see, where is he at? If we put in Michael Gallup, if you put in Michael Gallup, you pretty much want Dak in there. But let's say it's I want to put Herbert over Dak all day. And I think I want to have Eckler in there if Gallup's that captain. And Pollard I want to have in there too. And let's say that we want to put in, let's put in Aubrey for consistency. That leaves us 92. That leaves you with the ability to put in Lamb. If you put in Lamb, if we took out Herbert and put in Prescott, that would leave us with 10K. That leaves us, we still have like Lamb that would, help justify a little bit more. But that's only that would leave us with like a what do you call it? Let's get rid of Pollard and let's put in Keenan Allen. So if it's Allen and Eckler, those are the ones who getting the most volume on that side of the ball. That still leaves us the ability to put in Lamb. So that might be the way to go if you're building a Gallup lineup. You put in Dak Prescott with Gallup and CeeDee Lamb. You got Aubrey getting field goals because they're not converting with Pollard touchdowns when they're in the red zone. But you got Allen and you got Eckler on the other side, like just volume hogs. And, they're the ones that Justin Herbert is focused on, but maybe they're putting up more PPR points as opposed to necessarily touchdowns. Maybe Eckler's running a couple touchdowns or running a touchdown or something. But the getting these cheap guys in, we've seen it work a few times recently. I generally don't like doing it because it basically sets you up to have the huge chop with everybody. But it is an interesting way to go. And like a lot of these mid guys, like a lot of the guys at the top are all going to have 10% ownership in the captain, which actually, that's not like necessarily like a bad thing. But if you can find a mid guy that you like, that you can put in the captain, that's not going to, set you up with having a massively duped lineup. It could be Lamb, it could be Palmer, it could be Everett. Like just try to experiment with a little bit and play around with it. Like don't necessarily expect it to be like a high scoring game, even though the total is as high as it is, because we got like an offensive coordinator who's like our defensive coordinator is familiar with the offensive coordinator on the other side, but we also have a team in Dallas that just wants to run the ball. So it could be could be a low scoring game. Like Dallas's offense is just being anemic in general too. So just keep that in mind when you're building your lineups tonight. And just keep an eye out for the video later on today. I'm looking for 15 likes in order to get that out. But hit the like button, hit subscribe on the page, and follow us on X at Heatseeker Sports. And good luck, everybody.